ബഹുമാനപ്പെട്ട ശ്രീ കെ പി എ മജീദ്, ശ്രീ സിരാജ് ഇബ്രാഹിം സേഠ്, വേദിയിരിക്കുന്ന എല്ലാ വിശിഷ്ട വ്യക്തികളെ, വിദ്യാർത്ഥികളെ, സുഹൃത്തുക്കളെ, എല്ലാവർക്കും എൻ്റെ വിനീതമായ നമസ്കാരം. ആദ്യത്തെ ചോദ്യം, ഏത് ഭാഷയിലാണ് സംസാരിക്കേണ്ടത്? ഇവിടുത്തെ എന്നെ ക്ഷണിച്ചു കൊണ്ടുവന്ന നിങ്ങളുടെ MSFൻ്റെ നാഷണൽ വൈസ് പ്രസിഡൻ്റായ അഹമ്മദ് സാജു എന്നോട് പറയുന്നു, നിങ്ങളെല്ലാവരും ഇംഗ്ലീഷാണ് കേൾക്കാൻ ആവശ്യപ്പെടുന്നത്. അതെയോ? അതോ മലയാളം കുറച്ചുകൂടി എളുപ്പമായിരിക്കുമോ? ഇംഗ്ലീഷാണത്ര ഇവരും പറയുന്നു. ശരി, then I'll say a few words in English. എന്തേ വേണ്ടേ? കുറച്ചൊക്കെ മിക്സ് ചെയ്യേണ്ടി വരും തോന്നുന്നു. ശരി, രണ്ടും പറയാം. അല്ല, I'm here because we are all facing an unprecedented moment of crisis in the country today. We all know that young people like you, students from around the country, have spontaneously stood up in protest against the regressive and undemocratic policies of this government. Look at the extraordinary outpouring that we have seen in 125 towns across the country as young students have come out, braved the police lathis and the tear gas to stand up and say, "We believe in India." What is this idea of India that we're all standing for and we're trying to defend? You're all students. You know the nationalist movement and where it went. You all know that when the nationalist movement split, it didn't split on ideological grounds. It wasn't Marxist versus capitalists. It didn't split on geographical grounds. It wasn't north versus south. It split on one issue alone: should religion be the determinant of nationhood? Those who believed that their religion was also their national identity, they wanted a separate country for themselves. That was the idea of Pakistan, and Pakistan was created. But everybody else, led by Mahatma Gandhi, by Jawaharlal Nehru, by Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who was president of the Indian National Congress from 1940 to 45, Dr. Ambedkar, Jayaprakash Narayan, you name your nationalist heroes, they all said, no, religion does not determine our nationhood. Ours is a nation of all religions, all kinds of different people. Our freedom struggle was for everyone, and we will create a free India for everyone. And that's what the Constitution of India reflects. That is the idea of India embedded in our Constitution. Because what our Constitution does is enshrine a principle of equality. Whatever your religion, whatever your region, whatever your language, whatever your caste, your gender, your color, it doesn't matter. On this country's land, you are equal. And that is the principle that the Constitution embodies. That is the idea of India. നിങ്ങൾ എല്ലാവർക്കും, നിങ്ങൾ ജാതി ഏതായാലും, മതം ഏതായാലും, ഭാഷ ഏതായാലും, നിറം ഏതായാലും, പ്രദേശം ഏതായാലും, നിങ്ങൾക്ക് ഈ നാട്ടിൽ ഒരേ അവകാശത്തോടെ ജീവിക്കാൻ സാധിക്കണം. അതാണ് നമ്മുടെ വിശ്വാസം, അതാണ് നമ്മുടെ സങ്കല്പം. അതിനാണ് ഗാന്ധിജി മരണപ്പെട്ടത്, നമ്മൾക്ക് ഈ സ്വാതന്ത്ര്യം തരാൻ. Now we have the BJP in power, and the BJP has decided that they want to create a new India. They don't like the old India. Prime Minister Modi stood on the historic ramparts of the Red Fort in Delhi and said, we will create a new India. When you wait to see what the new India consists of, what he says is something that's perfect for all of us. India free from casteism, communal violence, corruption, nepotism, terrorism, an India that offers a dignified standard of living for women, man and child. That will become an economic powerhouse. Who can object to all that? That's what the old India was trying to be. So how is the new India different? Well, unfortunately, we've been finding out. Because for 6 years we have seen the gap between their rhetoric and the reality. We have seen the gap between what they say they want to do and what they're actually doing. The road to this new India is littered with the ruins of all that was good and noble about the old India, including the idea of India itself. And why is that? I'm sorry to give you a little more history, but the truth is you must understand this. I said the nationalist movement split on that principle, but there were also other voices that said the same thing, and one of those voices was the voice of a man called V.D. Savarkar, who was president of the Hindu Mahasabha in 1937, and who also said that there should be a two-nation theory, that Hindus and Muslims are different nations. He said it 3 years before Muhammad Ali Jinnah said it in the famous partition resolution, the Pakistan resolution of 1940. Savarkar is the man who came up with the idea of Hindutva. He wrote a book in 1922. The principles of Hindutva are followed by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, established in 1925. These dates are not accidental, because in the 1920s and 1930s, around the world, there were movements that were trying to stress this kind of idea: ethnic pride, racial pride, communal pride, religious pride. There was this quest for some sort of ethnic purity everywhere. In Italy and Germany, that became fascism and Nazism. And we all know how that ended: in destruction, in despair. In India, fortunately for a while, no one took them seriously. Those who advocated this view on the Hindu side, the Hindu Mahasabha, the RSS, they barely got 2 or 3% of the vote. The overwhelming majority of Hindus voted along with their Muslim and Christian and Parsi and Sikh brothers and sisters, and they voted for a united force called the Indian National Congress, where everybody could belong. For 70 years then, we built an India on that idea where everybody would live together, where everybody would be in the same place together. But what happened? In 2014, the BJP came to power for the first time on its own. They had won an election in 1998, but at that time, they were in a coalition government with 23 parties, so they couldn't push their agenda so easily. Thereafter, what happened was that in 2014, Mr. Modi's BJP came to power by singing a song of development. Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, he said. Development for everyone. He said, I have made Gujarat a successful and gave was they said this constitution rests on a wrong idea, the idea of territorial nationalism. What do they mean by that? They say the constitution also supposes that India is a territory called India, and the constitution is written for all the people on that territory. Hindus, Muslims, Christians, everybody, equally. Wrong, they say. A nation is not a territory, a nation is a people, and the people of India are only the Hindu people. Everybody else is either a guest or a bandit, an interloper, a dacoit who has broken into the house. And therefore they should be treated that way, and the constitution should be written only for a Hindu Rashtra. As I said, no one took them seriously for the longest time, but now people brought up in that way of thinking are in power, unfortunately, with an overwhelming majority in Parliament. So they have decided to pursue their dream. Before coming here, I was tweeting a tweet of Mr. Amit Shah from February, before the elections, where he said openly, we will bring a citizenship amendment bill and then we will follow it with an NRC, the National Register of Citizens. Why? Because they want to ensure that their project of a Hindu Rashtra becomes real. They want to ensure that the Citizenship Amendment Act, which has just passed Parliament, will lay, as it were, a nail in the wall on which they can hang their real portrait of India through the NRC. The Citizenship Amendment says that all the people coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh can get citizenship in India within 5 years instead of the usual 12, provided they are not Muslim. And they say the reason for that is that Muslims are actually not persecuted in those countries. But first of all, as I have been saying for many years as a former UN official, India is one of the very few democracies without a national refugee law. We should have had a law under which any asylum seeker from anywhere of any religion can come to India and say, I am being persecuted in my country, please help me. And the Indian government would have a quasi-judicial process to establish whether they have a legitimate fear of persecution, give them documentation, give them rights, and eventually, if they want to stay, they can be eligible for citizenship. But we have no such law. I've written a private member's bill proposing such a law. I've given it to the government of India, but they're not interested. Amit Shah said in Parliament, as long as he is there will never be a refugee law in India. They only want to help certain Hindus from the north, the northern states. It's not even to help all Hindus, because from Sri Lanka we've had Tamil refugees in Tamil Nadu for more than 20 years escaping the civil war there. Many of them are Hindus, but the BJP is only interested in Hindi-speaking Hindus, so they are not covered by the Citizenship Amendment Act. This is the reality we are facing. We have a very narrow-minded idea of nationalism. Sangojitta talparyamana ee BJP kaayira kanikkunnathu. And with that idea, the Citizenship Amendment Act will first of all violate the basic principle of equality in the Constitution, and for the first time in 72 years, it will introduce a religious test for citizenship. It is an absolutely shameful and disgraceful act. I was going to say bill, but now it's been signed by the President, so it's an act. Then what happens? You may know that there was an exercise for the National Register of Citizens in Assam. Others must have spoken about it. And in that exercise, which was intended only to identify a lot of Muslims from Bangladesh and send them back, what happened was that these enumerators discovered 19 lakh people who were not eligible for Indian citizenship, and it turned out a majority of them were not Muslim. So there was a big outcry from the BJP and its supporters saying, how can you do this? And Amit Shah said, all right, in that case, we will scrap that NRC, we'll have a new NRC, and in the meantime we'll pass the Citizenship Amendment Act, so any Hindu who's left out can come back into the country and stay, but any Muslim who's left out has no rights. That's the real purpose of this exercise. But it gets worse. Mr. Amit Shah wants to do an NRC throughout the country. Some states like Kerala have said they will not cooperate. Without the cooperation of the state government, you cannot conduct such a census. You cannot conduct such an exercise. But where they do it, in BJP-ruled states, all sorts of injustices are likely to happen. Again, let's say a Malayali Muslim working in Bombay, who does not have a birth certificate, will not be able to explain who he is, because they will say, how do we know you haven't come from Bangladesh? He may say, because I speak Malayalam, and they can say, maybe your father emigrated to East Pakistan. Why do we know that you are our citizen? You can't prove your date and place of birth, out you go. And you know that across our country, birth certificates have only become widespread and common in the last 25, 30 years. Before that, many people didn't have birth certificates. The poor, slum dwellers, rural people, minorities, many don't have birth certificates. And in Mr. Modi's government, there is a minister who was chief of the army staff, General V.K. Singh, who went to court to say that he didn't have a birth certificate, and the date given at the time of his admission to the army was wrong because it reflected a wrong date in his school admission records. So if a minister in Mr. Modi's government can't exactly prove when he was born, how can we expect some poor immigrant or some poor rural person, some poor Indian Muslim to be able to prove who he or she is, where his father was born, where his grandfather was born? It will be impossible. And that's exactly the purpose of the exercise, because those who can produce proof will become citizens. Those who cannot, those who are not Muslim, can become citizens in 5 years, but the poor Muslims will have their voting cards taken away, will have their rights taken away, their homes, their jobs, and be put in detention centers. Mr. Modi's government is building 9 detention centers already in Assam, and if the NRC is allowed to proceed, more will be built. This is a horror. This is not what India was meant to be about. This is not the India that Mahatma Gandhi fought to free. This is not the India that Swami Vivekananda spoke of in Chicago at the World Parliament of Religions in 1893, when he said, I am proud to speak on behalf of a civilization that has given shelter to the persecuted of all nations and religions. Can we say that anymore? The kind of Hinduism of which Swami Vivekananda was proud, that is not the Hinduism of Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah. Theirs is a narrow-minded, exclusionary Hinduism, whereas the Hinduism of those who actually represent the values and ideals of Swami Vivekananda would be to accept difference, would be to embrace difference. I've often said in my book, Why I'm a Hindu, that the great strength of Hinduism is the acceptance of difference. What do I mean? Again, Swami Vivekananda said, I'm proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world not just tolerance but acceptance. What does that mean? We're all studying in our history textbooks that tolerance is a good idea, is a virtue. A tolerant king is a good king. But actually, if you think about it, tolerance is a very patronizing idea. It says essentially, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will generously indulge you in the right to be wrong. Whereas the true difference between tolerance and acceptance, as Vivekananda put it, that would be if you say, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth, please respect my truth. That is the basis for all of us to live together in this country, not saying, I have the only first claim on this country and you will be excluded. Now, the bigger dangers we're facing, of course, are that the very notion of this new India is being accompanied by a serious undermining of institutions. All the institutions of India are not what they used to be. Parliament has become just a rubber stamp, a notice board for Mr. Modi's government's announcements. Whatever they say passes because they have an automatic majority. The executive is completely centralized. Mr. Modi runs the government along with Mr. Shah as a two-man army. They claim to have all the answers, solve all the questions. Just today there is a video going around when a journalist asked Mr. Shah about the CAA bill and the NRC, and he says, how will a poor person be able to prove anything? How will you be able to solve this? And Mr. Shah says, after thinking for a minute, you just leave it to the government. In a democracy, can you answer a question from a journalist that way? You just leave it to the government. You don't worry about it. I'll handle it. That is the attitude of the executive branch of government today. And these people, what are they saying? They're saying that they have all the answers. When Mr. Modi did demonetization, he didn't even consult his finance minister. When Mr. Shah rides roughshod through the constitution, I don't think it takes cabinet approval. I don't think anyone dares to challenge him in the cabinet. Today, a long-time BJP supporting writer, Chetan Bhagat, has written an article in the Times of India saying the BJP's problem is that the leaders are surrounded by yes men. You know what a yes man is, right? Whatever the leader says, the followers will say yes. If the leader says jump, the follower will say how high. There's no question of challenging, giving a different point of view, explaining how things are. The free press is no longer so free and is being thoroughly intimidated. Much of the mainstream press has found itself in a position where their owners are under pressure from the government because of their other business interests. Many others are being directly challenged. We've had 7 Kerala journalists arrested in BJP-ruled Karnataka just 2 days ago, doing their job. We've had an advisory going out from the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to the channels saying, do not show anything anti-national. What is anti-national? Who decides that in a democracy? Showing the people protesting is anti-national? I pointed out in an open letter to the Minister, Mr. Prakash Javadekar, that we have Article 19 of the Constitution, and that as far as our country is concerned, the Supreme Court's interpretations of Article 19 prove that actually showing our democracy at work is lawful. Slowing our democracy at work is awful. That's what this government is trying to do. And I don't need to tell you about all the terrible incidents of mob lynching, of attacks on citizens, the times when it has felt safer to be a cow than to be a Muslim in parts of northern India. That is not the India that Mahatma Gandhi fought to free. They want to transform the ethos of India from the one I've described to you, the one where everyone has contributed, where everyone has helped build up this country to what it is today. Instead, they want to make it into something much less than what it has been, an RSS vision. In fact, as I said not long ago, they want to make India into a Hindutva version of Pakistan. They want to create a state which is no longer truly democratic, a state essentially for the people of one religious identity, one communal identity, where everyone else will be living on sufferance as second-class citizens. That is not my ideal of India, that is not your ideal of India, and we must resist such an attempt in our country. You know, this government is very quick to run around saying, let us criticize the enemies of our party as anti-national. Who told them that the Prime Minister was equal, that the ruling party was equal to the Prime Minister is equal to the government is equal to the nation? That is not true. These are all separate entities. You can attack the ruling party, you can criticize the Prime Minister, you can disagree with the government, and you can still be a proud, proud patriot. That is democracy. When Amit Shah stands up and says you have to say Bharat Mata Ki Jai, I say I will say it if I want to, but my constitution, my democracy gives my fellow citizens the right not to say it if they don't want to. That is democracy. If a Hindu friend says Bharat Mata Ki Jai, and his Muslim classmate says, listen, in my religion or my understanding of my religion, I cannot maternalize the nation into a goddess, so I cannot say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. I'll say Jai Bharat, I'll say Jai Hind, but I won't say Bharat Mata Ki Jai. I believe he has the right not to say it. But Mr. Amit Shah will not agree. And I've been in a hall once where he challenged the audience to say it. And I was one of 7 people who refused to say it, even though I have no problem with the slogan. I have a problem with the imposition of that slogan. Do not let anyone tell you what you can do. But this government is all about slogans. It's all about one slogan after another. Make in India, digital India, start up India, stand up India. But the reality with the BJP is sit down India, shut up India. That's what they're all about. But you don't have to listen to them. You have as much right as young Muslim students of this country. You have as much right over this country as any non-Muslim on this stage. I can tell you about a visit I paid to the little island of Diu off the coast of Gujarat, in which we have a memorial to a ship sunk in 1971 by the Pakistanis during the war with Pakistan. Everyone went down on the ship. It was commanded by a captain of Kashmiri background called Captain Mullah. And when that ship went down into the waters, everyone on the ship died with him. And on the memorial, everyone's name is lovingly recorded for us to pay tribute to their memory. And if you read the names one after the other, tears will come in your eyes, because every part of India is represented in those names. There are Hindu names and Muslim names and Christian names and Sikh names. There are North Indian names and South Indian names and Gurkha names and Goan names. It's a monument to India, to the sacrifices that every community has made to make India safe, to make India what it is today. Don't let anybody tell you you have rights that are different from theirs. Your rights are the same as their rights. Your sacrifices, the sacrifices of your ancestors, of your community, to make India India is as great, as important, as relevant as those of any other community today. We will fight this cause because it's a vital cause of principle. It's a question of ideals, it's a question of values, it's a question of what we stand for in this country. Let me say that I'm in many ways quite proud of my faith, but I do not accept Mr. Modi's and Mr. Shah's interpretation of what my faith entails. We are a large faith, a diverse faith. Hinduism has millions of ways of worshipping God. We do not accept one interpretation, one view, one narrow-minded slogan that says Hindi, Hindutva, Hindustan. We will be a land where many languages, many religions, many communities, and many parts of the country will flourish equally, and we will fight for that, or we will go down trying. I just want to I have already taken half an hour. I just want to end by saying we must stand up against this BJP RSS attempt to create a new India when the old India was so wonderful and noble. We must act together and stand together, not only to preserve that idea of India, but also to remind the Indian people that what the BJP is offering the nation is poison. Poison that could gradually kill this country through the toxin that they are spreading in this land with their narrow-minded thinking. Their India, their new India as they call it, is not an India for all Indians. It is a grotesque distortion under which some Indians come first and other Indians come last. We cannot agree to that, because their new India does not promote unity, instead it demands uniformity. They do not value consensus, instead they insist on conformity. Their new India seeks to divide us rather than keep us together. What we need is to strengthen the democracy we have won in 1947. We need to strengthen the constitution we inherited in 1950. We need a strong government that looks after all sections of our society, including the weak, the marginalized, the poor, the minorities, not a strong government that crushes these sections underfoot. We need the kind of 9% growth we had under Dr. Manmohan Singh, and not the 4.5% growth we had under Mr. Narendra Modi. But whether it's 9% or 4.5%, we need an India that thinks about the 25% of our population that is living below the poverty line, and that needs a government to care about them rather than about dividing us on communal grounds. We need a new leadership in this country that empowers people, that harnesses their collective strength in the pursuit of a dream for all of us, not forces that seek to appropriate the people of our land into instruments of their power. I'm going to tell you a little story from one of the Hindu Puranas. It's a story of a sage and his disciples. And the sage says to his disciples, when does the night end? And the disciples say, why, at dawn, of course. And the sage says, I know that. But when does the night end and the dawn begin? So the first disciples from our part of India says immediately, I know, it's when the first streaks of sunlight shine off the palm fronds on the coconut trees, swaying gently in the breeze above the paddy fields. That is when the night ends and the dawn begins. Sage says, no, my son. So he turns to the other disciple, who's from the north, and he says, I know. It's when the first shafts of sunlight glint and gleam off the snow and the ice on the mountain tops of the Himalayas, and you can see that shining reflection in your eyes. That is when the night ends and the dawn begins. But the sage says, no, my son. It is when two travelers from our vast land meet from opposite corners of our country and greet each other as brothers. And when they embrace each other and see that they sleep under the same sky, see the same stars, and dream the same dreams, that is when the night ends and the dawn begins. The BJP is imposing many a terrible night on the history of our country. Let us stay strong, let us stay united, and let us stay determined to ensure that we will bring a new dawn to our nation. Jai Hind!